Hey, Daily Dosers, Pastor Hans here. It is so great to be with you tonight, Tuesday night. Before we dive into the Daily Dose today, would you take a minute, share this post, like it, so we can get the word out about God's love, God's grace to our whole community and beyond. Hey, tonight I want to talk about fishing. I love to fish, but most of my fishing these days happens with my boys who are in 3rd grade and 6th grade. And most of that fishing is pretty tame, I'm going to be honest. We fish for sunnies and bluegills and a few crappie, every once in a while a northern. But every once in a while, I get to go fishing with my buddies. And let me tell you, I have gotten myself into a few predicaments. A few predicaments where the storms started raging. We got stuck in some storms along the way. And whenever I go fishing, for whatever reason, I occasionally think of those storms that I've been caught in. And I was reading today the story of Jesus and his disciples. They were in a boat and they were caught in a storm. And if you know that story, you know the disciples were terrified. They were scared out of their minds that this typhoon-like storm was going to capsize the boat and they were going to lose their lives. But if you know the story, you know that Jesus was in the boat. Jesus was asleep on the boat, and they shook him and they said, "Jesus, don't you care about us? Don't you care that we are going to die?" And of course, if you're familiar with the story, you know that Jesus looked at them and said, "Why are you afraid?" And Jesus just calmed the storm. But here's what's interesting. When Mark, the Gospel of Mark, tells the story, he says, after the storms calmed, the disciples, well, it went sort of like this. And they, the disciples, were filled with great awe. Another translation of that would be, they feared a great fear. And they said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" You see, I always think it's interesting that after the storms were calm, that's when they feared more than ever. That's when they were really terrified. That's when they realized they were really filled with all kinds of emotions that were really, really scary. And so I often wonder, what do you think it was like when that boat finally came ashore? Do you imagine they just hopped out of the boat and they went back to life as usual, as though they hadn't just moments before been screaming for their lives, as though they hadn't survived this typhoon out on the sea? Or do you imagine, maybe like me, that they crawled out of their boats? They were waterlogged, they were soaked, they were exhausted, and they threw themselves on the beach and they whispered to one another, "Thank God we're alive." And they paused for a moment and let it all sort of soak in. You see, folks, we have been in the midst of a lot of storms. I think it's day 84 since this whole COVID thing had a sheltering in place. And then on top of that, over the last 2 weeks, we've been wrestling with what everything that's happened since the death of George Floyd means for us and for our community. It turned Minneapolis upside down and has sent protests literally around the world. And I wonder, as we navigate these storms, if we have a God who, like those disciples, is inviting us, rather than to just go on with our lives as usual, to sort of jump out of the boat and get back to normal, if God invites us, like those disciples, to sort of pause for a moment, to let it all sink in, to let it all soak in, because it has been a lot. It has been too much for many of us. And for us to wonder, what does this mean for me? How am I different? How has this changed me? You see, I've been doing a bit of that. Here's what I know. Since COVID set in, I have spent a whole lot of time with my family. And there's a couple of things I've realized about my family. I have a really great family. But too much of a really great thing can be too much sometimes. I've also learned that I'm more of an introvert than an extrovert, but I need people. And I'm longing to be with all of you. I need to be around people. Since the death of George Floyd, I've been forced to also look inside. To look inside and ask questions about my views of racism. And I've had to realize that I often look at racism as acts that individuals do, racist sorts of things, like using the N-word or the sort of things that happened back in the day of Jim Crow laws. And what I've had to come to realize as I've paused is that racism is something that is a part of me and a part of all of us. It's a part of the fabric of our world, and that it's not right, and that I participate in that. I've also realized that in our country, we like to make things neat and simple. That it's either cops who are the problem or it's African Americans who are the problem. And that's just not real. It's not right. And what we're doing when we do that is we're trying to put this whole big issue of racism, we're trying to keep it at arm's length so that we don't have to do the hard work of looking inside us. I've also had the opportunity to have some really powerful conversations with some of our state troopers, some of our police officers in town. And they are just as heartbroken as you and me. They were hurt when they saw that cop do what he did on May 25th. And what I've come to understand is that, yes, there was a bad cop, but that doesn't make all of them bad. In fact, we can be really proud in the police officers in our community. You see, we want to simplify things. You see, those disciples, they were out in the midst of the storm, and when Jesus calmed the storm, the boat came to shore, and I imagine they plopped down on the beach, and they just paused. Thank God we are alive. And they let it all soak in and wondered, what does this now mean for me, for my life? Because let's be honest, it has been too much. But it's never too much for God. A God who walks with you and a God who walks with me. Folks, have a good night.
Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. You are good, good. Oh, 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 let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Whoa, he is my song. You are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh.
You're never gonna let me down. 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 You're never gonna let me down.
night is holding on to me. God is holding on.